All right. I'm blessed to have Mr. Sinugo. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Stege.
um, please introduce yourself and what you do.
All right. My name is Livhuwani Sinugo. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm a husband as well outside the work environment. Married to a beautiful wife, Tendo Sinugo. And I've got two beautiful kids, Zoe and Zion. I think those guys are going to be the future engineers,
Elon Musk.
of tomorrow. Yeah, alien masks,
Sure.
of tomorrow. So, yeah. So
um,
in a nutshell, that is myself.
sure. Um, I call him Groot Man. For those who don't know, because there was a skit that was done by, I'm forgetting his name. So he said, "What is a Groot? An older brother in Afrikaans, they called him a Groot man. It's
Sure,
just Groot man.
sure.
So I said Groot man. So that's where Groot man comes from.
Comes from.
And maybe just a bit of background is your wife. She came to the podcast.
Yes,
I had the privilege of hosting her,
yes.
and yeah, the podcast did very well.
Mm.
And I shared with her that she even got a job opportunity.
Wow,
They said we want a project manager. We
wow.
like it. I was like, yeah, I think that's part of our community in a sense
Sure,
that we're trying to bring a community of big brothers and big sisters who can share their ideas
sure,
and what they do
sure,
in their professional, so at least it can help someone.
sure.
Thank you so much for honoring the invitation.
It's a pleasure.
Because
It's an honor to be here.
so let's get to the beginning of you choosing electrical engineering. Why did you choose electrical engineering?
Interesting question. I remember, I think one thing that sparked the desire for engineering, not just electrical engineering, engineering as a profession, it's when I was growing up, when I'm watching TV, I would ask myself to say, how does this TV thing work? When my mother is listening to a radio, I'll ask myself, like, how does this radio thing work? So I think the idea of wanting to find out how things work that sparked my interest in engineering. I remember when I was growing up, I got into trouble because my neighbor's child had a toy, and I took the toy and dismantled it. Trying to figure out how the components work. And when I was putting it together back again, I couldn't, and then I got into trouble for that. So I
Sure.
think that sparked the interest of engineering because I wanted to know how things work. So I think that is what birthed my desire for engineering.
Mm.
So yeah.
So you get to the options that you have, right?
Mhm.
Why did you choose electrical engineering?
Honestly speaking, when I went to varsity, I had no clue what I wanted to study. When I got there, I think I met a gentleman who actually told me that he asked me a question to say, "What do you want to become?" And then I told him, "I just want to solve problems," And he said, "No, there's something called engineering, out there." Um, and then I asked him, "Which one is the most difficult one?" And then he went like, "No, electronics engineering is the most difficult one."
Okay.
I said, "Okay, fine. Let me try electronics engineering."
And is this when you are in high school, or that's when you have, yeah, trying to apply?
When I was trying to apply, it
Okay,
was one of
sure.
the career guidance.
Oh, the career guidance. Okay.
So yeah, I met a gentleman who told me about engineering, and
Mm,
then when I went back, I did some research about it, and I realized that, you know what, I think let me do electrical engineering
mm.
primarily on the power electronics space because I wanted to become a power electronic engineer.
I see. Yes.
So yeah, and then I registered, went to varsity, studied electrical engineering. The more I was in varsity, that's when I realized what engineering is all about.
Mm,
I had a perception of what engineering is all about, but when I
mm.
was in varsity, I realized that no, man, I had a different view of what engineering is all
Sure.
about.
Sure.
And yeah.
What shocked you the most?
I
What shocked you the most?
think what shocked me the most is um, the hours that I had to put, in the lab, trying to figure out, putting
Resistance.
circuits together. You know
Sure,
how it
sure,
is, yeah.
sure.
So trying to put circuits together, and I get frustrated. Um,
Breadboards.
yeah, until a time where it works. When it works, I think that's one thing that I looked forward to. That moment of celebration to say this thing is working, and trying to show off to everybody that, hey, I managed to get something to work.
Sure.
So yeah,
So there was too much work.
yeah,
I
that
mean,
was a lot of
you
work.
studied at UP. How was it like at UP?
Hey, it was interesting, because UP is how can I say it? It's an Afrikaans dominated environment. So I remember most of the project activities, they would pair us into groups, right? And you find that you are in a group where it's Afrikaans dominated people. So just trying to break that language barrier, to try and just to say, what, just to bring the consciousness of English in the group, because people, they relate better in their own language. So you find that you are in a group of Afrikaans speaking people and they are speaking Afrikaans, and you bring it to their attention to say, I don't understand Afrikaans, please accommodate me in English.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the challenge that I faced when I was in UP. It was an Afrikaans dominated environment. Yeah.
So more or less the bringing the consciousness to allow your classmates to speak in English.
Yeah.
And then how was that like for you? Um, Trying to get the guys to in a sense consider you as they're doing group discussions.
Um, I think it made me have that self-realization. I think that's something which I learned, when I was in University of Pretoria, and just being in that environment, and also being in a position where you can speak out, to say, hey guys, let's, you know, accommodate me. I also want to give an input. I also want to learn from you guys. So I think that is one thing which I learned in that environment. And yeah, I think I wouldn't want it any other way. I learned a lot from that circumstance which I was exposed to, because even now in the work industry, you get to meet different people, different languages. So at least you can be able to stand up and voice yourself out and speak. So yeah.
I'm thinking of this. Did you get to learn Afrikaans or
Yeah,
just just to be
I
able to hear it at least?
yeah, I can hear a few words. So I think that's
Sure,
one thing which um it I learned a little bit of the language, because
sure.
after that experience, I went back and wanted to at least know the basics of
Yeah,
what,
sure.
when a person is speaking, I can be able to hear what they're saying.
I think what you're saying is like, I mean, there's a typical thing that happens to. I'm not sure about you, but to me as an engineer in Cape Town,
Sure.
you get into meetings and the gents are just speaking in Afrikaans, and you
Sure.
have to tell them, hey, dudes, we are a rainbow nation. Let's speak in English.
Sure.
And I think that's there were many ways that I had to see it. That if I was in vendor and I was like maybe doing engineering in my own language,
Sure.
I would easily speak to you in vendor, since we both speak vendor.
Sure.
And it depends in terms of that thing of saying that Ubuntu or how you were raised, where you
Exactly.
say, okay, if you see that there's someone who does not understand, you
Sure.
you kind of like note it in your mind and then you speak in the language.
Exactly.
But it seems like the gents were not really understanding that. So so I have to always ask them, hey gents, can you please speak in English?
Mm,
And if it seems like it's being a difficult thing, I have to tell them, guys, what did you say?
mm.
So they realize that it's a lot of work to repeat themselves.
Exactly.
So you would rather just speak in English and,
Sure.
and make it easier for both of us, so that
Sure.
at least we don't waste time and also get the project ahead.
Sure.
So I think it becomes a a challenging thing.
Mm,
I'm not sure about Joburg, but I know Cape Town is like a prevalent thing where Sometimes you even receive emails. You get copied in emails where it's already in Afrikaans,
Africans
and
already,
you
yeah.
don't really understand what are we talking about here. But I think I guess it's part of the things that as time goes on, we get to that consciousness of saying that because English is not our mother tongue language,
Exactly.
and that goes vice versa to even African speaking people.
Exactly.
It's not their mother language, but we could get to a point where we say that this is a medium that is used almost everywhere, unless if we want to go to Mandarin. Because apparently that's the language that has been used a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that's the reason why I'm bringing it up is for those people who are in engineering.
Yes.
And I'm sure even in other sectors it's probably the same
It
situation.
is the same situation. Yeah.
So I'm just bringing it up because we might as well just talk about the real challenges that are happening in workspaces.
In the workplace, yeah.
So we might as well just discuss them. So like, even someone who's listening, like, hey, I'm gonna be faced with this situation.
Exactly.
I must know how to deal with it.
Exactly.
Right.
Because I mean, if you look at where you sparked the question, you asked me about how was your experience in UP, you know. It started there, you know, at varsity. And I thought, okay, fine, I can't wait to leave varsity and go to a work environment.
Yeah.
Maybe the exposure is going to be, it's going to be different, you know, exactly. So when I came to the work environment, I realized, you know what, it's exactly the same thing which is happening here, you know. And that's where I told myself to say, you know what, I need to, if the conversation is important in terms of my understanding, then I need to bring it up to say, guys, please, let's speak in the medium of language that we understand.
Sure.
But if the conversation doesn't include me at all, then the guys can flow, you know, in Afrikaans. And that's where I get to hear what they're saying because I can understand Afrikaans, you know, in the process. And also I'm learning Xhosa as well.
Sure.
Because my environment, there is a lot of Xhosa speaking people and Afrikaans speaking people. So I thought it was an Afrikaans thing, but I realized that no, it's how like people relate better in their
own language.
On their own language.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's something
I think I like that. Like we were saying that if we were in Venda,
yes,
we would have been speaking in Venda.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. But I think it's a thing that we need to bring that awareness and respect for other people who don't understand, to try to bring it in a medium where everyone can understand.
100%.
So whether it's Xhosa, whether it's Afrikaans, we have to come to a middle ground. The middle ground is English.
It's English, yeah.
And some of us don't even know how to articulate it properly, but at least let's try to meet somewhere.
Exactly.
And together we can. I think that's an ANC.
Yeah.
The ANC, the ANC and other parties. Anyways, let me not get into the politics.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've learned in such circumstances is if I get to a group of people and they're talking, the first thing I ask is what is the conversation of the day, you know?
Okay, sure.
And then they will leave the language which they were using, tell me what they're speaking about in English, and then if I show interest, they'll continue in a medium of language that I would understand.
Okay.
But if I don't show interest, then they will continue in the language which they were speaking. Yeah, exactly. Sure. So sometimes I even give them that privilege. So guys, you can continue speaking in the language that you guys were using if you're more comfortable in that. Because the topic, I'm not really invested. I'm not gonna add any value in the topic. Yeah, exactly.
I like
so,
it.
Yeah.
So I think you started UP the time when it was known as a tough place in terms of academically, like very strong.
Sure.
I'm not sure about now, but only you can give an input on that, right? What is it that you did to make sure that you graduate and finish your course?
Hey, interesting question. Yeah, it was blood sweat, I should say, you know. I remember, okay, my degree was a 5-year degree. I was on an engaged program, right, for 5 years.
Okay.
But I spent 6 years at varsity because, there were struggles there and there, you know. Yeah, there was blood sweat.
Sure.
So I think what really helped me to finish the mission, you know, was association. You know, I associated myself with people who who were, how can I put it? Who,
Sparta.
the smart guys in class, you
Sure.
know, so that my weaknesses, you know, I can see them and also push myself to the limits as well, you know. So I think that's what happened to me. I grouped myself with the people that were worked hard, you know, and you had the smart people as well in class. So I think that's something which really pushed me to be able to persevere, even if, you know, on days where even it was hard, you know. Because there were days where I would call home and say, you know what, I'm done with this engineering thing. I
Sure.
want to come back home. Then they will say, no, man, just push and finish,
Yeah,
you know. So yeah, those days were there. But I think the association, the people around me, they pushed me to a point where I was looking forward to graduating and finishing, you know.
Sure.
So yeah.
That's very interesting. I like that. Association is very much important, and I think it's something which is also a recurring thing. That recurring advice from the graduates.
Yeah.
Saying that association is very much important, and focus, knowing why you're there,
Yeah, focus.
is another thing that I've noticed, right? So you graduate, I'm sure you're very happy at the time, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So where does your career start, and what are you learning in the beginning?
All right. So my career started when I left varsity, I should say.
Okay.
You know, because when I went into the work industry, um, I I had the book knowledge, they call it, you know, and I wanted to translate that book knowledge into something physical, you know, something tangible,
Sure.
you know, solving real life problems.
Theory.
Yeah. So that's when I realized, yes, theory is very important in for you to be able to understand, you know, the problem that you are dealing with, you know. But you realize that, you know, you get to a work, they tell you about um, a transistor and you've never seen it before, you know. They tell you about I think that's a better example, not transistor. Let's
Transformer.
use a transformer, for
Sure.
instance. Yeah, exactly.
Substations.
A substation, you know.
Sure.
So you've got this picture that you see in books, you know, an idealistic view of what a transformer is, what a substation is. So when you go into the real world environment, that's when you realize that, hey, there's so much learning that you have to do,
Sure.
you know. Because when I went there, I thought, hey, I knew it all, you know. I'm here to give, you know, the knowledge that I've learned from varsity.
Sure.
And that's when I realized that, hey, I'm here to give and also receive, you know,
Yes.
from the environment that I'm going to. I think that's where my career really started. And that's when I opened my mind to learning, and I learned as much as I can, you know, from different ages of groups, the older, the younger. So yeah, I learned a lot when I left varsity. So I
Okay.
should say, yeah.
So I want us to now okay, maybe, so I thought about this question, and how hard is it to reconcile theory theory with practical information, in terms of the requirement the requirement needed for you to understand the specifications of a transformer, for example, with the knowledge that you came with from high school. It's like there's a huge gap, right?
Sure.
So how did you reconcile that gap, and then did you have mentors who were helping with that?
Yes, I wanted to go back to that to say
Sure.
mentorship. I think it was the key,
Sure.
especially the guys who have had wealth in terms of the knowledge that they had through in the companies, you know, in the company that I'm working for. Um, so yeah, I think that's one thing that I relied on the most, mentorship, where I can get to a point where I say, guys, I don't know. Please, can you guide me on understanding what I'm doing, you know? So obviously the older generation, they are always willing to, you know, to give,
To share,
you know,
yeah.
to share, especially if you humble yourself. If you come with that ideology of saying, I know it all, already you're going to get resistance from them, you know, because also they don't want to feel like they don't, like, if you treat them like you know it all, and you're undermining them, at the end of the day, they hold back on the knowledge that
Sure.
they want to share with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think my strategy was go to the person, like I would go to the older generation and then I humble myself, and say, I don't know how to deal with this,
Mm.
and then they will show me to a point where to a point where they can reach.
Mm.
And then that's when I can bring in my knowledge that I've learned from varsity and then make it work faster, make it work more efficiently.
Mm.
And then when they see it working efficiently, then they will come to me and say, man, how did you do it this way? That's when I get to come in and show
Share you.
them another way
Okay.
of doing
Mm.
what they showed me.
Mm.
So yeah.
Um, what projects did you do in the beginning stage of your career that maybe let's start with what you like the most, and maybe you finish with the one that showed you flames. Maybe let's start with the bad one, and we start with we can finish with the good news.
Okay, I
So,
think
which project which you felt like, yeah, this one was like, hey, this is like a lot, and then you can now explain the one that you liked the most
sure.
in the beginning stage of your career.
My career. Okay. So when I left varsity, um, I had a privilege of working for one of the biggest, like working on one of the biggest projects,
Mm.
um, in Kimberley. I think that was the nicest one. So let me fast forward and go to the one which I didn't like.
Okay.
So it was one of the projects which I inherited from someone.
Okay.
So the person was going to retirement, and my manager said, "No, I see potential in you. Here's a project that it will be a good challenge for you."
Sure.
So I just took it on to say, you know what, he's saying that it's gonna be a good challenge for me. So let me see what this challenge holds for me.
Sure. Sure.
So when I took the project, there wasn't a proper handover. I think that's one of the things which, if there's engineers out there who are listening, they need to know the process of handing over.
Mm.
To say when something is being given to you, request a proper handover to be done.
What does it look like? Proper.
So a proper handover is at least the person who was running the project must give you like a brief background of what the project
Mm.
is all about, and like what they did to initiate the project, and everything they've done in the project so far, until the point where they want to give it to you.
Mm.
So that at least when you're taking the project, you've got context of what the project is all about.
Sure.
Because you don't want to take something and you realize that certain things are not in place, and then now you need to close the gaps yourself. So it's always better to, the person, when they're giving you the project, you sit down with the person and then they tell you how the project started, and also just give you the highlights of what are the challenges in the projects, and also just try and bring the client or whoever, the whoever the stakeholder is in the project, so that at least they can also get to know you, and
Because you're the one who's gonna be taking care of the
taking
electrical
care
side
of
of things.
everything. So I think that's very important, the handover process in the project. So that never happened on the project which I took over.
Mm.
And then when I was in the midst of the project, I realized already there were a lot of things which were never, which were never done, which were never covered in the project.
Sure.
So I think I spent most of my time in the project putting out fires instead of me enjoying the project, and delivering the best that I can on the project.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, I managed to deliver on the project, and yeah, it was a success, but I struggled a lot. So I think that was one of the projects which I didn't like. Just to give you context, it was a project of, we're installing new infrastructure within Transnet, which is the 11 kV transmission line, which was going to give supply to signaling, So yeah, when I came in, I didn't know what I was doing. And also the handover process never happened. So when I came in, I inherited a lot of issues. So I think that was, one of the projects which I had to take on.
Would you say that you learned a lot from that project, in terms of how is it like being thrown in the deep end? Would you have preferred maybe to have someone who was holding your hand and maybe try to guide you?
Sure.
Do you prefer being thrown in the deep end, or having someone that can at least guide you. What do you prefer on that?
I think where I am currently, because of the experiences that I've had,
Mm,
I don't mind being thrown in the deep end. But I
mm,
think in the initial stages when I was starting to work, I felt like I needed somebody to take my hand
mm,
and walk with me, because my fear was making mistakes, So having that person with you, walking with you, you know that even if you fail, that person is there with you,
yeah.
So I think I, then I preferred working with someone to show me, guide me,
Mm,
But right now, I feel like I learn more if I'm thrown in the deep end.
sure.
But in the initial stages, when I was starting my career, being thrown in the deep end, I yes, I would learn. Like when I look back,
Mm,
I see the things that I've learned from.
mm,
But in the midst of the project, I wouldn't see my learnings because of the fear, the anxiety.
yes.
So I would have wanted somebody to walk with me, then,
Mm.
yeah.
I think once you were explaining that, I'm actually realizing the importance of confidence,
Mm,
because it's the problem is not being thrown in in the deep end.
mm,
Firstly, you want to have some form of confidence, because
sure,
that's why now you say that
sure,
now you don't mind, because
sure,
at least
sure.
this is a learning curve for you. You
Exactly,
actually, if they give
exactly.
you a new project,
Mm-hmm,
you're like, okay, I've not done this,
mm-hmm.
let me go learn. So you
Exactly,
already have that confidence.
exactly,
So I think
exactly.
maybe being thrown at the deep end in the initial stage is somewhat okay,
Mm-hmm.
but you need maybe a helping hand, or maybe someone where you can always go and consult
Exactly,
and help you with the project.
exactly.
So getting to the good side, the one that you liked the most.
Sure.
Mm,
All right. So when I left varsity, I started I started in 2015, and then I was sent to Kimberley, and then in Kimberley, it was one of the biggest projects. So this project had little projects in it,
okay.
and I was fortunate to be given one of the little projects within the big project,
Okay. It's like phases,
yeah, in
something like that.
phases,
Okay.
So I think that's what made it fun to say I didn't have this chunk
Mm,
where I had to, bite all at once.
mm,
I was given small projects which built my confidence.
sure.
I could execute, finish it, look at it. I was like, no, this is brilliant.
How is it to commission a project that you were given,
Mhm.
like you see, like especially the greenfields ones,
Mm,
where there's nothing, and the
mm.
next thing when you're done after you see this thing like actually designed. How does that feel?
Hey, it's a good feeling, eh?
Sure.
Yeah, it gives you that sense of I've accomplished
Accomplishment.
something,
Yeah. Sure.
accomplishment. Yeah,
Mm,
exactly. So I think that's one thing that I look forward to. When I start a project and I see nothing in it, when I finish it and look back, that feeling, it gives me confidence for the next one to
sure.
say, you know what, I produce good things, you know what I mean?
Mm,
So I think that's one thing that I look forward to when I'm taking a project because of my previous experiences on other projects
mm,
to see where it started, where it finished. So when I'm taking another project and I'm seeing this project, which is an incomplete thing,
mm.
I know that when I complete it, it's going to be a wonderful thing.
Okay.
So yeah, yeah.
So what project were you doing in terms of maybe detail and context?
All
The
right.
small chunks, and maybe it's not big and get explain
Okay. So what I've
without saying too much if it's
not
you
a problem. Eh?
sure.
So um the business case study, right, was
Mm,
to increase capacity, right?
okay.
I work for Transnet.
Okay.
I don't know if I already introduced that, but let me just introduce it. I work
Mm,
for Transnet. So Transnet we are, okay, Transnet Freight Rail, right?
mm,
So there's different businesses within Transnet, right? And then the Freight Rail is where I am currently. And we are responsible for moving different commodities within South Africa,
mm,
right? So um, we have railway, right? So they wanted to increase capacity
mm,
in the manganese line.
mm,
So the manganese demand was getting higher. So they wanted us to increase the capacity, meaning that put longer trains. When you put longer trains, obviously your railway lines have to accommodate those bigger trains, right?
Okay.
And also your electrical power requirements, they change,
Okay.
because those are electrical trains, so now they demand more. So
Sorry, I just want to pause you there,
not
right?
a problem.
Can you go into detail in terms of how that world works? Because I think I would appreciate it just to at least, because as you explain it, I'm like, okay, that's I didn't know how that's how it works.
Sure.
So I'm not too sure if maybe you can get into like detail in terms of how the train. You see the train and sparks and everything, but you just don't understand how it works.
Sure.
I don't know if maybe are you able to get into detail, or is something that's maybe is confidential or something.
No, I can get into the
Okay,
details.
please get into detail so that at least I was actually so excited as you're explaining.
Sure.
So maybe you can just continue explaining in terms of the increased capacity and
Okay.
yeah.
All right. So as I was still saying, to say, maybe let me just give you a clear background of what Transnet is all about, and then I can get into the details, right?
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So Transnet is it's a parastatal company, right? And then we have business divisions within Transnet. And one of the business division is your Transnet Freight Rail, which is the custodian of the rail infrastructure. And we move freight within the country, right? Your freight will be moving minerals from the mines, taking them to the ports or to local clients within the country. And then you get your Transnet ports, which I mentioned now. The ports are divided into Transnet National Ports Authority, which is TNPA, and then there's Transnet Pipeline, which is the port terminals. Transnet port terminals, right? So there's Transnet National Port Authority, and there's Transnet TPT, Transnet Port Terminals, right? So National Ports Authority, they are the landlord of the ports, right? And then TPT, they are the operations within the ports.
Okay.
And then you get Transnet Pipelines, where we move fuel in
Okay.
pipelines.
Okay.
And then you get Transnet Property. So we have a couple of properties within the country, and we are leasing them to businesses as well. And then there's Transnet Engineering, right? Those guys are in charge of the rolling stock, which is the trains, the locomotives, and the wagons, right? So the maintenance of the locomotives and the assembly of the locomotives and wagons, they are done by Transnet Engineering. So I fall within the Transnet Freight Rail space, and that's where we deal with the rail infrastructure and also the overhead, which is the electrical part of the railway infrastructure. So with your overhead infrastructure, right, obviously you need supply from somewhere in order for you to be able to move trains, electrical trains on the lines.
Sure.
So we've got substations, which are being fed by Eskom, right? So Eskom supplies power to our substations. Then we supply power from the substations to the overheads feeding the trains, and the trains can then move all the commodity that we transport within the country. So in this project, we were increasing the capacity, as I was indicating. So when you increase capacity, obviously the substations need to meet that demand of the increase in capacity. So we were upgrading those substations and also upgrading the overhead that you find on the trains.
So you're upgrading the cables.
Yeah, the cable sizes and all these things.
Okay, sure.
So
sorry. I just want to understand something now.
not a problem.
So that means having more load on a train, that's basically increasing the capacity of the power required for the train to pass.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Okay. And then technically, are you able to assist to understand, okay, how does it apply? Is it because I'm trying to understand. And unfortunately, so this is what I've done, right? I've went to study the beginning of electricity, right? And you get to hear people like Benjamin Franklin,
Sure.
the guy who discovered electricity
Sure.
through a kite and all that story, right?
Sure.
And to think of the story that people will think electricity, which is basically lightning, was something which was like very taboo.
Sure.
They would think, hey, if you are hit by lightning, God is judging you.
Exactly. Yeah. Sure.
But it was not the case, because that experiment by Benjamin Franklin, it was a beginning of the change of, or maybe the beginning of us getting into the, I don't know if it's the third industrial.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as I was studying that, I moved on to finding out that people like Thomas Edison and who's this guy? Tesla.
Tesla, yeah.
And Tesla. Those guys are guys who also contribute so much into the involvement of understanding how electricity works.
Sure.
And even the introduction of steam engines from coals and everything. So steam engines, I understand in terms of pressure. If there's steam, it causes the train to move that way.
Exactly.
So that's what I got. That's how far I got. But I didn't get to a point where I understood how trains work using electricity.
Sure.
I understand how a car works using electricity, but I don't know how a train works. So I just wanted you to explain that technical side of things, if you can get into it.
Okay, not a problem. So basically, if you look at the evolution, like of like how trains evolved over time, as you indicated, there was steam locomotives, and then over time there was diesel locomotives.
Okay.
Right. And then now with electricity, then they discovered that, you know what, we can move these trains using electricity. Right. That's when, you know how, like, obviously, if you're gonna move trains with electricity, there needs to be motors in place, right? So obviously, if you look at it in this way, I mean, if you've got motors which are driving this train and you supply electricity to those motors, right? You can be able to propel the train forward, right? So on the train itself, on top, there's something called a current collector pantograph, right? It's a device that they use to collect current. And then inside the train, then there's a mechanism that converts the power that will be required by the motors, right? For you to be able to propel the motors.
Sure.
So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what happens. You know, you've got a current collecting conductor on top, and then that current flows into your train. It goes to the motors, and then it propels the train forward.
Sure.
Right. So you're driving. It's actually motors.
Motors,
Yeah.
yes. So you're powering motors
Exactly.
to actually move it. Okay.
Exactly.
No, I
Exactly.
understand now.
Exactly.
I think when
in layman terms, yeah.
Yes, I think I
Yeah,
really love the fact that you brought motors, because I didn't really think, like, I was trying to think, okay, how is electricity being but thank you so much for that. I think maybe you can continue, because I think you were explaining on
increasing the capacity.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a high demand. Actually, even today, there's a high demand of manganese, right?
Sure.
Like outside the country, right? So we are exporting manganese. So right now, okay, yeah, there was a demand in manganese, and then we had to increase the capacity, you know, in order for us to be able to transport more manganese. So with that, we had to increase the substation capacity to be able to feed into these trains, which are going to be loading more manganese, and then also regulate traffic on the railway line, right? So by regulating traffic, it means that we had to add extension loops on the side.
Okay.
You've got this main line, and then now when the train is coming from the mine loaded, and there's one which is coming from the port unloaded, these trains are gonna come, you know, on the same track. Now you want to have a bypass on the left,
Okay.
where you can stage a train which is empty to allow the train which is loaded to go to the port.
Is that the reason why they have robots?
Yeah,
Traffic
traffic lights as well.
Sure.
So those are they call them signals, right? on the railway space. So they regulate traffic where you stop one train and then you take the other train to a siding on the left, a loop line on the left, and then you move the loaded train to the ports. So what we're doing is we're extending those loops because remember now you when you increase capacity, you add more wagons which are loaded.
Sure.
So when you're adding more wagons, it means that loop on the side is not long enough to accommodate that train.
I see. Yes.
So we're extending
Okay.
that
okay.
loop line, right?
Looks like
When
a
you
good project,
extend the loop line, you need to electrify it. You know, it needs to meet the requirements of electrification as well.
Sure.
So that was my project. So I was involved in the extension of the loop lines, right? That was the small part of the project which I was involved in. And then further down the project, I then jumped from extension of the loop lines. I went to upgrading the substations. That's where there was a lot of responsibility because obviously I would have to communicate with different clients, ESCOM, because they are the ones who are supplying power to the substations. And then I had to communicate with
Contractors.
the contractors, you know, so different people I had to communicate with. So I think that was the highlight of my learning, communication, for me to be able to communicate with different stakeholders.
So you're doing project engineering now.
Exactly. That's when I started doing project engineering. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then what did you learn the most from that project? What did you learn the most?
I think one thing that I learned is, you know, when you leave varsity as an engineer, you think you're going to be dealing with, you know, you're going to be dealing with electrical moving parts, you know. When you get there, now you must deal with contracts, you must deal with people, you must deal with finances, you know. So I think for me, I had to adapt in different spaces. I think I learned to adapt in different spaces as an engineer, to say I mustn't have this fixed mindset, to say when I'm an engineer, I'm expected to work with this engineering thing, you know. So when I got into that space, I learned to adapt, you know, to say I'm working with a project now, and in the project space, this is what happens, you know. This is the processes that you must follow in order for you to be able to run a project successfully. So yeah.
I'm gonna ask a question, which is okay. I'm just gonna ask the question, right?
Sure.
Do you think varsities they prepare us enough for the workspace?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
Why
I
is
think
that?
varsity. Okay, they try and introduce different subjects, you know, like communication skills, presentation skills, you know, but they don't bring it into the context of work, you know. It's more academically structured, you know, and you don't see where it fits in the work environment. So when I leave varsity and I'm going to the work environment, it's difficult for me to be able to point out what I learned in varsity and say this thing is going to help me here in the work environment, you know. So it looks like you switch off a switch that you had for varsity, and then now you switch on another switch which you need for the work environment, you know. And it makes it difficult. It looks like you are learning afresh, you know, when you leave varsity. So I don't think varsity they prepare us enough, you know. I think we need to get more exposure into the work environment when you're in varsity. If there was initiatives where varsity students could go in the work environment, see how things are in the work environment, and come back, and at least when you are learn with the approach of where you're going when you leave varsity, I think that would help a lot.
I like that question. Maybe the follow-up question was, um, is there any advice that, or maybe is there something that you feel like this would have been very helpful if the varsity were to do it, besides the one that you just mentioned now?
I know some institutions they have it, the idea of
Like
in-service
in-service
training,
training, sure.
right? But the problem is they leave it to the end. You know, when a person has completed their studies and they are transitioning from varsity to the working environment. If there was a way in which they could incorporate it from first year learning, you know, so that at least you can also see your area of interest, you know, before you even graduate, to say, you know, imagine if you are studying for 4 years and you spend 3 years studying just to realize that what you want to do after you study is not what you really want to do.
Sure.
Already it's too late.
Yeah.
You've already spent 3 years. So I think if there was a way in which they could introduce that in first year, and then maybe mid-year, and also in your final, where you get exposure to the working environment,
Sure.
I think it will really add a lot of value. Yeah.
I think I like that, and I agree with you on that. And I think I like that perspective that you brought in. That at least it must be in the beginning of the year, so that at least for us in CPUT, I realize that there's like a lot of companies. There's a power transformers.
Yeah.
Just behind CPUT.
That's correct.
Which creates transformers from scratch.
Sure.
Taking a group of students to to that company, it would be so much. It will have so much value because they even have mini subs.
Exactly.
They create mini subs as
Exactly.
well.
Exactly.
Someone, when they see that big machine that's just standing there with just with the danger zone and it's green, you just don't understand what is it.
Exactly.
But that's almost like the lifeline of each and every company, or it's because that's a supply for
exactly.
What do you call this, for companies, right?
Exactly.
So if they were to go there and at least have an idea of what is a transformer made of and how is it made, they would at least, when they are solving problems, they already know what they're doing.
Exactly.
So I think I like that a lot. Getting to the more experienced side of of your work, right? So what is it that you're busy doing now? And you've just tried to get us into your world.
All right. So I think just to quickly give you timelines in terms of my experience,
Sure,
and where I am currently. When I started, as I indicated, I was more of a project manager,
Sure.
right? Contract manager, they call it.
Okay.
So I was managing contracts, right? And then fast forward, I was appointed as an engineering manager, right? Engineering manager is now you managing other managers that are managing projects, right? So now you need to just give feedback on the projects they are running and give guidance where guidance is required, right? And then, so I got to a point where I realized, you know what, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, managing people, managing projects, So I went to my senior and then I told him that, you know what, I want to go back into the technical space where I will solve technical problems.
Hands-on, yeah, sure.
Exactly. So that's when I started being involved in substation protection engineering, which is a new how can I say it, new department that has started in my work environment.
Okay.
So now we are busy with substation protection systems, right? Where we design substation protection systems, and we also test and commission substations, right?
Okay.
So yeah, that's where I am currently, and to me, it's a good space where I am now, as compared to running projects. Yes, projects, they gave me exposure, they gave me experience, and also, at least now when I'm solving problems, looking at my experience that I had when I was running projects, at least I can be able to see the problems which I'm solving, and
Sure.
I can relate with those projects, with those problems, because I've ran
You've
projects.
managed them, yeah, sure,
Exactly. So
sure.
yeah.
Okay.
So currently we're just supporting the project teams,
Okay.
by commissioning all the projects they run. So if there's a new substation that is being built, when they've completed them, we go there and we do commissionings and like testing and commissioning.
Yeah, it's like yes.
So it forms part of the quality assurance. Yeah.
And then what do you like the most about it?
I think it probes your thinking. I need to always be reading.
Okay.
Which is something, when you're doing projects, I feel like when you're running projects, sometimes you're following a standard operating procedure, and then when you are, testing a substation or commissioning a substation, things don't always go according to plan. You know, you
Mm-hmm.
get there, you are testing, something doesn't work. Now you need to figure out why is this
What
thing
is the
not
problem?
working,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
And then it requires you to always be learning, always be studying, always be researching, you know, even on the spot, you know.
Mm.
If something is not making sense, you consult, you know,
Mm.
different literatures. You can even call people and find out, hey, this thing is behaving like this.
Sure.
What do I do in this space?
Mm.
So I think for me, it always challenges me, you know, and it makes me to think. It stretches my mind, you know. So yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I'm enjoying where I am.
Okay, thank you so much, Goodman. I think I got to understand your world in electrical engineering.
Sure.
I think maybe this will be the last question.
Mhm.
Looking back, um, does 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 choosing electrical engineering feel like a good thing that you you always wanted to do? Mm,
Yeah, if I were to go back and choose again, I think I would go for electrical engineering,
sure.
you know, because there's a lot of problems to solve in the electrical engineering space.
I mean, we even have load shedding now.
Exactly. You know, so that's one of the challenges which we are facing,
Sure,
you know.
sure.
Not just load shedding only, also protective devices when power
Mm,
goes on and off, you know,
mm, mm.
because a lot of people are complaining about um,
Such
their
generators.
yeah, exactly,
Mm,
their TVs being affected,
sure.
their fridges being affected. You know, you
Mm,
just coming up with an idea or just being around people who are experiencing an electrical problem,
mm,
and then you then, you know, go back and think about it to say, how can I bring a solution to this type of problem, you know.
sure.
So even in my workspace, there is one project which I was approached by one of the clients, and they indicated to us that we need to see the feasibility of having an alternative power supply, you know,
Mm,
so that during load shedding, at least they've got an alternative supply
sure.
which they can have.
Sure. So looking
So
at
it
generators,
was, you know, looking at generators and
solars.
solars, you know,
Mm,
exactly.
mm,
So I think electrical engineering has got so much to offer.
sure.
There's so much opportunities, I should say, and not just on the employment side. You can also have your own
Company. Yeah.
company that you can
Mm,
start, you know, because there's so much problems to solve in the
sure.
engineering, in the electrical engineering space.
That's true.
So
Thank you so much, good man,
yeah.
for sharing wisdom. And for me, I think in terms of the freight rail, I think I understand it much better now.
Sure,
And just understanding how this body Transnet works.
sure.
And I think I like that a lot. And maybe in closing, I always ask my guests, maybe can they please advise someone who's listening?
Mhm.
Anything can be anything. Just advise them so that it can go. That can go a long way.
I think one thing that I can say to a person who's listening is, if you are in varsity, I think I'm going to speak to those who are in varsity
Okay.
transitioning to the work environment,
Mm,
is try and associate yourself with people who are in the space where you want to go. If you're in varsity, look at the working class people, you know, who are doing more or less similar, like similar to
mm,
what you want to do when you leave varsity,
sure.
so that at least you can get an exposure on what is it that, like, what is it all about when you leave varsity and you want to become an electrical engineer,
Sure.
you know.
Sure.
I think that's something which, when I was in varsity, I was only focused on the varsity life.
Mm,
I never fast forwarded and looked at life after varsity
sure.
to associate myself with people who are in that space, so that at least I can I can see the picture of where I'm going, you know.
Mm,
So I think that's one of the advice, to say associate yourself with people who are there where you want to go, where you're aspiring to go, you
mm,
know. If you're in university and you're aspiring to go to the working environment, try and find someone who is in that environment, you know,
mm,
and then they can give you sort of like a guideline of what's going on in that environment. So I think that's one advice that I would give a person who is in varsity. And for those who are in the working industry, I think they need to, like, I would say, go for knowledge, you know, upskill yourself.
mm,
You know, if there's an opportunity for you to grow, always take it, you know, take that opportunity for growth.
mm.
Um, so yeah, that's one thing I would say they must do. And if there's somebody who is in the company and they've got wealth of knowledge, try and stick with that person and learn as much as you can, you know. I mean, learning from your own experience, it takes time, you know. But if you can find somebody who has learned and they can give you that information, you know, go for it. I think it will put you in a better position. I think that's what I've done. And, you know, I appreciate the older generation in the company because I've learned so much from them to a point where I don't have to wait for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years to learn what they've learned. You know, they're sharing that with me on a daily basis. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you so much for honoring the podcast.
Sure.
I know we've tried so many times to try to have this.
Yeah, it's been.
Mr. Sinugo is traveling. You're always traveling. I think maybe should we talk about traveling? I think maybe let's leave it for the next one.
All right.
So at least we know that when we're coming back, we know we're going to talk about traveling and other things. But thank you so much for making time. And Second Podcast appreciates you.
Sure.
And I think on that nutshell, we're just going to close it here. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.
Awesome. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I appreciate you taking time and tuning in and be part of our community. We get to share ideas, stories, and perspectives through this podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found something valuable in it. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your family and friends. I look forward to connecting with you in the next episode. Until then, take care. This is Stega Podcast signing out. See you next time.